yourself might be the start of finding peace. Let's talk about it with Joel Muddamalle on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
Hey, we're so glad you're here that you would take an hour out of a busy schedule and spend it with us is highly complimentary, and we appreciate it very much. You always have a place at our table. I always say that, and I always say we just don't allow you to talk. But we're glad you're here. If you're wondering, I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy. Matthew Porter, our executive producer, is here. Matthew says nobody should suffer from imposter syndrome unless you really are an imposter. And that's so bad. Our producer and resident bass player, Jeremy, is in the glass booth. He's seen a million faces, and he has rocked them all.
Oh, my.
And Dr. George Bingham is the president of Key Life, and our one-man IT department, John Myers, is in his tech bunker. George focuses on all the numbers, and John just concentrates on the ones and the zeros. And
just a little bit at a time.
And Kathy Wyatt is the soft feminine side of this program. Kathy, today is National Peach Cobbler Day. Oh. Seems like something we should celebrate with maybe some cherry pie. Not going to happen, is it?
I'm following the logic in that one.
Hey, we have a great, just a great guest, and he wrote a book called Humility and How I Achieved It, and it's one of the great books. Dr. Joel Muddamalle is the Director of Theology and Research at Proverbs 31 Ministries. He's a co-host of the Therapy and Theology podcast. I don't know either how you put those together. He also serves on the preaching team at Transformation Church in South Carolina and frequently speaks at conferences and events around the country and the world. Joel's new book, which I hold in my nicotine-stained fingers, is titled The Hidden Peace: Finding True Security, Strength, and Confidence Through Humility. I went into George's office this morning, and he was reading this book. And I said, "Are you humble yet?"
Because he knows I need it.
He said, "No," you said, "Yes, I am. And I'm quite proud of it."
Probably the most humble person you've met today.
Joel, we're kidding about this, but this is a good book. I spent a good time with it this morning. And man, have you hit on something that is so very important. Listen, tell us a little bit about your background, and especially the very embarrassing moment when you had only one word in your vocabulary, and it was dog, and it ruined your whole life. Give us a little bit of background.
Yeah, so I loved your guys' intro, Steve. You know, you're the white guy, and I'm not. So I'm not the white guy. So that's an important detail for this story. My grandparents are actually missionaries in India, and so to have an Indian who's Christian is a unique and kind of special thing. My earliest memories are of my grandfather traveling to rural villages with ministering to a group of people called the Untouchables. It's kind of a caste system in India. And so this is like the lowest of the lowest. And then if you get lower than that, that's who this group of people are. So absolutely no hope. And so my earliest memories are of my grandfather preaching and teaching the gospel, and spreading the good news of Jesus. And so that's pretty special. My parents, I was born in the great land of Chicago. I watched Jordan win the three-peat. I cried when he played baseball. And then
We
I
all
had
did.
tears of
Yeah,
joy.
we all did.
We all did. I had tears of joy when he returned and he played. He came back and he won us another three-peat. And so, but before all of that, I was born in Chicago, and my mom was finishing nursing school, and so she actually sent me to India to live in India with my grandparents and my aunts and uncles for 2.5 years. And so my first language was Telugu. It's a dialect, one of the major dialects in India. And then, my mom and dad were like, "Hey, it's time for you guys to come back." And so I came back to the United States. I had a high level of comprehension, like I could understand English, but I did not have a great vocabulary. I could say a few words here and there. And so my grandfather was a principal of a school. I felt very comfortable in school settings and classrooms. I was with him all the time. And so here I am rolling into my first day of school, and I'm thinking, like, in my heart, in my little 5-6-year-old heart, I'm like, I'm gonna crush it. I just had that sense of like, hey, I'm gonna do well. This is like a safe environment for me because this is what I'm used to. And this teacher, like, I rolled into this class, and already I don't look like everybody, and everybody's speaking, and they're speaking great English, and I just kind of instantly knew, like, I've got some insecurity, like, how am I going to do this? And the teacher asked a question. She was like, does anybody here have a pet? And I was like, okay, start strong, like, be the first one to answer this question. So I raised my hand, and I said dog with confidence, and she was like, great. And she goes, what's the name of your dog? And now I'm panicking, and I'm like, dog. And now, like, okay, just like what you guys did. Imagine a room full of kids that are doing just what you did. They're kind of laughing. They're like, no, for real. What are you actually saying? And so the teacher said, and the teacher slowed down, which I don't know if you guys ever noticed this. Like, sometimes you ask a question and then we think that if you just say it slower, it's going to be an easier answer. It doesn't. It just makes us feel dumber, right? And so slowly, no. What is the name of your dog? I'm like, that didn't help me. That didn't help me at all. And I just responded, dog, and everybody erupted in laughter. There was even this little animal in the corner, and I think it was like a rabbit or a hamster, and that thing was laughing at me too. I'm like, oh my gosh, And this was the first time in my life that I realized the world wasn't safe. And I realized that, like, this is what it was, a type of, I call it a soul hurt, a type of deep settled hurt where I realized I didn't have control. I realized, as smart as I was, it wasn't going to help me in that situation. I couldn't humor my way out of that situation to make the laughing stop. And so I made a vow in my heart where I was like, I'm never going to walk into another room and be the butt of a joke. Like, I'm never going to walk into a room where I don't feel like I'm the smartest, where I don't feel like I can really provide some level of quality in this conversation. And that sent me on a long journey of pursuing achievement, of working for my worth. I will say this: I learned to develop a good sense of humor, and I kind of am like I'm going to make fun of you before you can make fun of me, because I had to learn really quickly. Like, the first person to make the joke is the one that people aren't laughing at. They're laughing at the person who made the joke, right? And so I learned all these things, and then that led me into my faith and my love for Jesus, and realizing, oh, maybe if I can just do a lot of academic exploration, I can really understand my faith. Like, I can really understand who Jesus is and the story of Jesus throughout the scriptures. And so I'm a theological mutt. I went to an undergraduate degree, non-denominational Bible college. And then I did an MDiv, a seminary degree at Knox Theological Seminary, which is Presbyterian. And then I did a PhD at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. And at the end of all of this work, I realized, dang, like, I really don't know that much. And the letters in front of my name or after, depending on how you do them, all it really does is just remind me of all the things that I don't know and I'm unable to do. And at the end of all of this achieving and trying, man, I just landed in a spot of exhaustion and more fear and more anxiety. And you know what's lacking when you're fearful, when you're anxious, when you're just wondering when is the next thing going to blindside you? Peace. peace is lacking. And I just was in a place of restlessness. And that's really kind of the backstory of my journey, and why I ended up writing this book on humility.
You know, people are listening to what you're saying, and they were saying all of that came from that incident about dog. But the truth is, we all have those kinds of experiences, and they make us just exactly what you're talking about. And if Jesus loves us, he generally brings us to the end of ourselves. And so humility, in a sense, isn't something you go out and hustle up. It's something God does to you, and you gotta learn to recognize when it happens. I don't like making a fool of myself, but God does that to me a lot, and it is, in fact, how I became a spiritual giant. And if you believe that, you'll believe anything. Hey guys, we're going to take a break, and we're going to back out for just a little bit. This is hard work. It doesn't seem like it, but that's what professionals do. We make the hard things look simple and easy and laid back, but we're exhausted. So we're going to have some cookies and milk, take a nappy nap, and then, like Jesus, we're going to return, and we're going to talk some more to our new friend Joel. The book is, and it's a great book, it's called The Hidden Peace, Finding True Security, Strength, and Confidence Through Humility. When you find it, you can go out and brag about it. Thanks for joining us. We're having a good time talking to author and speaker Joel Muddamalle. I love that name. I've got a name. It doesn't get more pedestrian than Steve Brown. Joel, would you like to trade?
No, you've had it long enough. I would hate to do that to you.
By the way, his new book is titled The Hidden Peace, Finding True Security, Strength, and Confidence Through Humility.
Joel, I've been enjoying your book, and one thing that came across is kind of one of those paradox-sounding things. You mentioned pursuing power in the context of humility. Can you kind of talk about that? How did that fit?
Yeah, so I think we actually have two ways to view the world. And this is kind of a biblical thematic idea. I'll give the technical terms and then just summarize it. But like, one is an anthropocentric view, which is a human-centered view. I refer to this as the unholy trinity of me, myself, and I. And then you have a theocentric view, or a Christocentric view, a God-centered view. And the thing about humility is that humility can be aimed, in that the way that it's aimed is through that lens of anthropocentric or theocentric. And so that human-centered way is really, really fascinating, because what it suggests is that the only way for me to actually experience true peace, for me to make it through really hard things, or to prevent really hard things, that's the ideal. Like, we don't even want to go through it. Like, we just want to prevent it. But the only way to do that is to take things into my own hands. To take power into my own hands, to put myself in positions of power. And in a worldly, me, myself, and I-centered view, then there are casualties when it comes to that view of power, because the king of that scenario has to be me. And if I'm the king, then everybody else are the peasants. And if I'm the king and everybody else are the peasants, then they're pawns in the chessboard to be sacrificed at my own whim. But what that actually does is it places me in a position of true idolatry, and it's ruining relationships with people that I'm in. And there's nothing peaceful about that. And what's fascinating is the power of humility. Like why I think this is such a important conversation and virtue that was deeply rooted in the first century church and actually all throughout the Old Testament is that humility helps us to actually experience a type of power that is not sourced from within me, but it's actually sourced in the resurrected Christ and the power of the Spirit of God. And that's a type of power that flows into us that we don't have to try to conjure up on our own. And in that sense, because it's theocentric, because it's Christ-centered, it's something that we can trust and we can rely on that's going to keep the best of who we are without sacrificing our relationships in order to keep us in positions of peace or in positions of security. And so that desire for power is often rooted in an underlying condition, and that underlying condition is honest. Like I don't think we should despise that condition, that desire to have peace, the desire to have stability, for things to go right. But the means by how we get there is super important. And if we use means that are destructive, it's actually going to be self-destructive. But if we use means that God gives us through the power of Christ in the power of his Spirit, then it's actually going to be self-renovating. It's going to be self-restoring because that's what Jesus does for us.
Oh, man. This thing really is counterintuitive. I mean, you know, if you're not a believer and you're listening to this broadcast or podcast or watching the video, if you're not a believer, you're thinking, that's crazy. I mean, I'm going to pursue what I want because that's the only way I get it. And you're saying, no, that's the way you don't get it. And that's important.
Joel, I say on a regular basis, I don't do vulnerable. It's kind of like, it puts up that great wall, and people immediately know how far they can or cannot go, and I know that vulnerability, that the fear of all of that is the fear that somebody will really find out, who I really am or what's really going on in my head. And anyway, would you please give some insight into how we overcome our fear of being found out?
Yeah, that's so good. One of the more fascinating things that I found during my biblical research process is that the presence of humility is actually present in the Garden of Eden. And often, we want to do our study of humanity as a Genesis 3 reality, after the fall. And I think that's really a bad way to do anthropology. We shouldn't study humanity from Genesis 3 on. We actually ought to study humanity from Genesis 1 and 2 so that we can make sense of what went wrong in Genesis 3, so we can understand God's will for us to regain our true humanity in Genesis 1 and 2. And Kathy, this is fascinating. What I found is the natural state of Adam and Eve in Eden was a natural state of humility that was actually evidenced by vulnerability. And that word vulnerable, it comes from a Latin word, which means to be wounded. And what's fascinating about the Eden story is that Adam and Eve had no fear of being wounded by anything outside, but the thing that actually ended up wounding them was pride that was inside, that was presented to them. So they actually wounded themselves in that space. And so how do we live vulnerable lives without being destroyed in the process? Because honestly, not everybody can be trusted with our vulnerability. And so this is, again, where humility is so important. Humility actually serves as a watchtower and as a gate. So in the ancient world, in order to protect a city, you would build up walls, right? You'd build a watchtower, you'd build a gate. And if an ally comes, great. You can open up the gate. The watchtower lets everybody know it's an ally. You're good. But if an enemy comes, you're going to close up that gate. And the watchtower people are like, there's an enemy. Let's man the walls with the archers and stuff. What happens if you have a city that has all walls, but no gate or watchtower? Well, you don't have a city. You have a prison, and you've imprisoned yourself. So the gift of humility is actually regaining self-awareness. So you can be vulnerable with the right people, but you can also create humble boundaries and keep the wrong people out that are going to harm you. And the entire process of this, it's tied closely with our sanctification. The power of humility is that humility actually taps us into the original story of our true humanity. So it's like to lose humility is actually to miss and to lose out on the very fabric of who God designed us to be. And that actually is a great tragedy. And so humility is actually a protection for us in that sense.
Wow.
Boy, that's good stuff.
Gosh.
It's going to take me a little bit to process it. That's not easy, is it? I mean, it's easy to say, but it's kind of scary to do, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
But if you're willing,
And it's not, and Steve, it's not something that we should have an expectation that we're going to do perfectly on day one, right? This
Yeah.
is, I often say this, Christian life is slow growth.
and sometimes it's so slow you don't even know there is growth. But it's worth the risk. I mean, if you're depressed and down because everybody thinks you're ugly and your mother dresses you funny and you're trying to fix it, wouldn't it be something just to say, I don't care, because God thinks I'm something else? Well, guys, we're going to return. We've got a lot more to talk about, and you don't want to miss a bit of it. The name of the book, and I've told you before, but you never listened to me, The Hidden Peace, Finding True Security, Strength, and Confidence Through Humility. Don't go anywhere. Hey, thanks for spending this time with us. And I know you're glad you did, because we're hearing some good stuff. Because we're hanging out with the author and speaker, Joel Muddamalle. And you can keep up with him, with Joel. Let me spell this to you. It's Muddamalle.com.
Just like it sounds.
Oh, yeah.
Just like it sounds.
I put mud in it. And on Facebook, Instagram, and X at that word again.
Very lyrical. Joel, you have you talk in the book about hidden pride, and immediately a very embarrassing incident from my experience springs to mind when I hear that phrase. Short version: I was at a film festival, had a film that was in competition. They were screening all the films. They were going to screen mine, and I was all ready with my little speech. And hey, it's not about me; it's the team. Well, they didn't show my stinking film. They showed everybody else's. They didn't show mine, and I was livid. There's a word for it, but I can't say what the word was on a family show. And immediately the veil comes off, and it's like, you were never humble. You're a raging pride monster with this gross patina of humility over it. It was terrible. So when I hear hidden pride, you're like, ooh, I have that was
That's
me.
That's not a good memory.
It's not a good memory. It was not a good moment for me. What do we do about hidden pride?
Well, I think, man, you just modeled it. You literally just modeled it for us, which is you become aware of it, you accept it, and then you realize I've got to do something about it, right? So those are the three movements. Now, here's the danger of hidden pride. The danger of hidden pride is, how do we actually become aware of it? Because that hidden aspect of it is what makes it so deceptive. Typically, what's happening here is that hidden pride is actually a conversation that's happening secretly in the chamber of your human heart. There's a reason why the Bible is talking about the heart is amongst the most deceptive of all of the body. I mean, you're having these internal dialogues, right? And so, like, the question for you might be like, okay, what was that internal dialogue that happened in your heart? And it can be a split second of when you realize that your film wasn't shown. So if it was me, I'd be like, those knuckleheads, their films were shown and not my film. Like, my film is like you're having these conversations. So what we have to do, one, is expose it. Here's another very difficult part of hidden pride, and I think this specifically for Christians is massive. Paul in Galatians chapter 5, he talks about the fruit of the Spirit, and the way that he talks about that, I have an entire chapter about this in my book. He talks about the fruit of the Spirit, and he uses agricultural terms, right? The fruit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness. What's fascinating is hidden pride can often present itself outwardly as the fruit of the Spirit, but on the inside, it's corrupted. So the fruit of the Spirit is supposed to be aimed outward to honor God, bring Him glory, to be edifying to the people of God. Like, notice the expression is external; it's to go out and into the community. Hidden pride takes the fruit of the Spirit and turns it inward. So it's only as good as it is beneficial about building your own personal kingdom, about building your own personal ambition, about your own, desires. And that inward orientation is so self-destructive. And the real secret and the real challenge of this is you can live off of the fumes of hidden pride for a time. It might even be a long time because it's presenting itself beautifully. But at some point, you will bite into that fruit and you'll get down to the core and you'll be like, I've been eating poison this whole time. This whole thing has been infected, right? And that is the danger of hidden pride. This is where we need humility. Humility is not a checkbox in the Christian life that we move on from. Humility is, in fact, the very soil of the Christian life that we live from. And like any good soil, you've got to tend to that soil. We're left wondering, Paul talks about this agricultural imagery with the fruit. Well, what's the soil of the fruit? And I argue in my book that the soil is humility. And if you leave the soil unattended, foreign objects will come in that will compromise that soil. And compromised soil will lead to compromised character, and compromised character will inevitably lead to a compromised person.
Oh, man. Matthew, I appreciated your vulnerability. Just as an old guy, I think once you repented and achieved humility,
Yes.
I hope you went back and kicked butt.
Oh, yes.
But with humility.
With humility.
With humility when you did
That's
it,
right.
because that's unconscionable. Or you could have called me. I would have done it
Right.
for you.
You guys are in trouble. You don't know.
I just want you to know that. Does this mean, and this will require a short answer, and if you don't finish it, we'll do it on the other side of the break. Does this mean we all become wusses? Or can we, on occasion, quote, kick butt?
So I think what you're describing is actually the misunderstanding of what humility actually is. And on the other side of this, I'm going to unpack why humility is actually a protection, a prevention, and a preservation in our life that doesn't make you weak, but it actually helps you tap into ultimate strength.
All right. Boldness,
I'm going to stick
the
around.
Bible calls it. The author has a book, and he calls it The Hidden Peace, finding the true security, strength, and confidence, and doing it through humility. Hey, we're going to back up for a little while. You ought to get this book. This would be a great book for small Bible study in your church, maybe your neighborhood. And then if she's really bothering you, you can give it to your wife. Or if you're tired of the old grouch, give it to your husband. They'll be easier to live with. You can trust me on this. That's why I'm so loved by my wife. Hey, thanks for spending time with us here. By the way, if you'd like to get the best of Key Life right in your inbox, we've got you covered with Key Life Connection. That's our free weekly email. You can give it a try at keylife.org/subscribe. And it's free, so you shouldn't complain. Joel, before the break, we were talking about how there's a misconception that humility makes us weak, makes us into weenies and wusses. And you said, no, it doesn't. And then we ran out of time. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you have more to say on that subject. Could you do that?
Absolutely. I think we need to always go back to Jesus. Like, what is true about Jesus will be true about us. And in Philippians 2, 8 and 9, it says that Jesus took on humility. The Greek word tapianos in the Greco-Roman world, it was almost universally rejected and despised. And so this is a shocking statement to say that Jesus took on humility, but then right after that, there's a therefore. And y'all are Bible scholars, you know, therefore is always there for a reason. And so the therefore is there and says, therefore he was highly exalted. So in fact, this is fascinating. Humility is not a place of weakness. It's actually a path to our exaltation because we join Christ where he sits in the right hand of the Father. This is what Ephesians 1 and 2 is saying. Now, let's make a connection with this. There's a famous saying that humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less often. This is historically attributed to C.S. Lewis. Very dangerous to disagree with C.S. Lewis, so I'm not going to disagree with Lewis, but I'm going to suggest that the biblical starting spot for humility is not self. The biblical starting point with humility is God. I first have to have an awareness of God. Well, if I know who God is, now I can know who I am. Now, who am I? I'm made in the likeness and image of God. In the book, I unpack how those two words in Genesis 2, 15 and 16, likeness and image, are Hebrew words associated with children of royalty. Well, here's the deal. If you're a child of the king, that's not a position of weakness. That's a position of power, right? But here's what humility is. Humility is a prevention, a protection, and a preservation. So humility protects us. It protects us from thinking too low of ourselves. Because if we think too low of ourselves, people are going to walk all over us and nobody want to be walked over. But humility is a prevention. It prevents us from thinking too high of ourselves. Because if we think too high of ourselves, we will be the ones who are walking all over people. And humility is a preservation. It preserves us and keeps us in the life of Christ. And there's no safer place for you and I to be than in the faithful and capable hands of Jesus. And so this is not a place of weakness. When we see it through the lens of the scriptures and through the lens of Jesus, it's actually a place of immense power, but that power needs to be stewarded in the right ways. And when it's done well, it produces peace internally always, and the potential for peace in our relationships externally.
Good stuff. All right. We know what it is. We know what it accomplishes. How do we get there? I mean, and this is all good stuff, but how do you develop true biblical humility?
Yeah, I think one, we were never intended to do the Christian life alone, you know? So here's a funny, unexpected, in between each of our segments, we have a little bit of time to talk. And what I found fascinating is there's not been one break that we've had that you guys have not laughed. There's just not been one. There's humor. This is fascinating. Well, how do we produce humility in our lives? Humor is a gift. When we can, in an appropriate way, laugh at the reality of our weakness and poke fun, not in a demeaning or a degrading way, but just in an honest human way of, like humor is a gift for us that helps us to root ourselves in a place of humility. Here's the second thing that you can do. And I encourage everybody to do this at least once a week, either at night or early in the morning. Walk outside, take off your socks, stand in the grass, look up into the heavens, into the sky, pay attention to where the stars are, where the sun might be, what's happening with the clouds. And then just repeat John chapter 1 to yourself. In the beginning, the first couple of verses, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of man. And then just say to yourself this very simple statement. Wow, all this stuff is held together, and it has nothing to do with me. Like if that doesn't produce humility in you, I'm not quite sure what will. And I think those are just practical things, and being in a relationship with people. Paul's favorite words throughout the New Testament is a reciprocal pronoun. The Greek word is allelon. It just means one another, and it requires intentionality of relationship. That, Kathy, you were talking about vulnerability, of a responsible vulnerability with other people that are trusted, so that you can know them and you can be truly known. These are places of cultivation of humility. So the opposite of this is isolation. It's a lack of humor, lack of fun, which is fascinating. It's this thought that I can control everything, when in reality, control is truly an illusion. The only person truly this is Psalm 46. The only person truly in control of everything is God himself. And so, I think those are just some very practical things that we can do today and tomorrow and for all the days that we have left till Jesus comes back or we go to him, that we can continue to cultivate humility.
You said something earlier that I thought was good. You said this doesn't happen quickly. It's a process. Does that mean if we don't get there quickly, does Jesus still like us?
The fun thing is that I think that Jesus's like and love of us is not conditioned on what we do. Because if it was, we're all screwed up. Like we're all in a heap of trouble there. And so Jesus likes us as we are. And this is Matthew 11:29 and 28 and 29, where he invites us to an exchange of yokes. And he's like, hey, after you've done this exchange of yokes, come and follow me because I'm gentle and humble. And here's the thing that I think is fascinating about Jesus. Jesus doesn't invite people to follow him that he's not intentional about being in relationship with. And Jesus doesn't just not love people, not like people for no reason. There's typically a reason. And so if that invitation is there for you and I, that's clear evidence that he does like us. Otherwise, he would have never even wanted to invite us to follow him. Do you invite people that you don't like to come to your house to have dinner? Probably not.
No, but
right? Hey, let's go on a walk. Let's go on a walk. Here's the person that I actually despise. You're not doing that. And so inevitably, there is this sense that Jesus likes us and he loves us. And it's the through preposition that's so important, that he's walking with us through as we're cultivating humility in our lives.
Joel, this is so good. And you've given us a lot to think about. I hope you're working on another book so we can talk again.
We'll see.
Joel, thank you very much for being with us. The name of the book, again, is The Hidden Peace, Finding True Security, Strength, and Confidence Through Humility. Now, that's a surprise, and it's a gift. Be glad for it. Joel, God bless you. Every time you come on this broadcast, you get 3 free sins. Jesus told me you were way behind, so it's a really, really great gift. Guys, we're going to come back for just a short time, and we're going to tell you who's going to be with us next week. And as always, you'll be pleased, amazed, and surprised. So don't go anywhere. Like Jesus, we're going to come back. Thanks for spending this hour with us. Our YouTube channel, by the way, is closing on 10,000 subscribers. Check it out now at youtube.com/Key Life Network. Be sure and click subscribe. Is there a charge for that?
Very modest charge. No, it's free. It's free.
Free.
It's the internet.
Why aren't we charging something, bro? We could make a
I'm
buck
not opposed to this.
Create an income stream with this thing.
On our way to 1 million subscribers.
There you go. Only about a few 100,000 to go. That's a good program. It gives you food for thought. I thought what he said about vulnerability to you was just amazing.
Yep.
We have such a warped view of humility. We think that a humble person is a humble person you can walk over. I wrote a book one time, and it was a book that was devoted totally to boldness. And if I had to do over, it was called No More Mr. Nice Guy. And in England, when they published it, it was Don't Let Them Sit on You. And there was an elephant sitting on this little guy. If I had to do it over again, I would include humility as the place of boldness. I would say the humble person, because they don't have anything to prove. They don't have to be somebody. They don't have to do anything except be themselves. That makes you dangerous. It really makes you dangerous. it's like being a politician without owing anybody anything, man. You got to have some leverage. And when there's no leverage, and that's what humility gives you, then you can be really, really dangerous. I never thought of that before. That's a good thought. Another good thought is who's going to be here next week?
What a fabulous segue.
Yes. That's worthy of a
The
segue.
master of the segue.
Yeah.
Next week, our friend Preston Sprinkle is going to be with us. He's been with us several times before, and boy, he just always has some very, very interesting topics. And this is the first one that hasn't had something to do with issues regarding sexuality and et cetera.
Yeah.
But the title of this new book is Exiles, the Church in the Shadow of Empire.
That'll be good. He quit writing on sexual matters because he got tired of people throwing rocks at him. Decided, I'm going to write a book where people like me. It's going to be a great program next week, and we hope that you'll join us. It'll be the same time, the same place, and we're going to show and hope you do too. Between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. And that gives you a wide, wide berth.